Hello, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the tarot and in particular the Fool. So from a philosophical point of view, what does the Fool tell us, or what can we get out of the Fool?
Lots of things. I think principally ideas to do with risk and danger, because the Fool is on the edge of a cliff. So there's something about risk and danger we can talk about. There's something about foolishness and wisdom. There's something about self-development, I think, which is important and applies more generally to the tarot. And there's something about symbolism and the value of symbolism more generally. So at least all of those things are involved in the Fool. So we can dive into any one of those. As the 0 in the deck, although it was only numbered later on, I think the Fool serves sort of as our avatar as we make a journey through the other cards of the major arcana. So it serves that function. The 0 is a neutral factor. I mean, 0 was invented too as a number, non-number. There's some debate about who invented it, whether it was Arab scholars or others. But it gives us the opportunity to project ourselves in among the other cards through the figure of the Fool, as if we are holding his hand and journeying with him. So in that sense, it creates an element of relatability, I suppose.
Yeah.
His journey is our journey in some respects. So, yeah, he works as a kind of avatar in some regard for us to connect to a deck of cards which otherwise, I suppose, threatens to be entirely cryptic and mystical, or mysterious at least, and might make it all the harder for us to connect with.
As a philosopher, what symbols are you drawn to?
Well, the principal symbol, I mean, there are all sorts of symbols here. We've got the flower, we've got the decoration on his cape, we've got the dog, and so on. And all of those carry symbolic value. But if we look at the drama of the card, and I'll show it here, what's foregrounded, I suppose, in that picture is that the fact that the Fool is about to step off a cliff. So we see him foolish insofar as he's paying no regard to his own safety. So we have a few things going on there from a philosophical point of view. The one I think which is most obviously relevant would connect to a Danish philosopher called Søren Kierkegaard, who was writing in the 19th century, who would have actually found quite appealing the idea of taking on a persona like the Fool, because he often wrote through different imaginary figures rather than writing in his own voice. But Kierkegaard specifically talks about the leap of faith, the leap into the unknown. And it's a leap of faith because what might be apparently foolish, to jump off a cliff, might in fact be wise, because you are giving over agency to a higher being. In the case of Kierkegaard, you're giving your agency over to God. So the leap of faith is saying reason can only take us so far in life, and at a certain point we have to make this leap into the unknown, which is the leap of faith. But it is a leap, and it's a point at which we take a risk where nothing is known, and only by risking everything, our lives, can we embrace faith and recognize that faith operates completely different, on a completely different basis from reason. So faith and reason, he talks about the night of faith and the night of reason as being different things. And so in other words, you can never argue your way to a belief in God, because God is a question of belief, which is not a question of knowledge. So knowledge and faith are profoundly and radically different entities. And when I look at the Fool, in a sense, he is evoking the same idea, that if you want to develop in life, not necessarily believe in God, and in brackets I should say, the picture in the background is of the sun, and not necessarily a sun god, it looks like as it were, a human sun, then we have to step off the edge of a cliff. We can't know in advance what's going to happen. We can't journey through life without taking risks. And moreover, when we take risks, we're more likely to meet with a happy rather than an unhappy outcome, even if the cliff edge itself appears to be dangerous. So in that sense, danger is safety. So we're forced to think about a paradox there, that actually the wisest course of action can be the most foolish sometimes, which is to operate on this leap of faith. So Kierkegaard would be the first philosopher who comes to mind. The second philosopher who comes to mind for me would be Jacques Derrida, the French philosopher, who, slightly referring to Kierkegaard, actually talks about the madness of decision. He says the point at which we actually make a decision is the point at which we stop thinking in order to act. So there's this infinitesimal gap between thought and action, between reason and doing. And it's that gap when reason leaves off that for Derrida would equate to madness, because when reason stops, what fills the void but madness? So madness is actually a necessary moment in the process of decision making, from thinking to doing, in a sense. Now, so we've got Kierkegaard, we've got Derrida. What's interesting here is that the fool is actually looking up. So he's not looking at the cliff edge. So he's not making a conscious decision in Derrida's terms. He's not making a conscious leap of faith in Kierkegaard's terms, as far as we know. He looks like he's just going to carry on regardless and just jump, or rather fall. But actually in Kierkegaard's terms, that's, in a way, it's all the better. It's the blind fall, like blind faith, which is all the more pure because it's all the more an act of trust. When Derrida writes about this, he refers back actually to the origin story, in a way, of Abraham and Isaac, where God tells Abraham to sacrifice his son. And despite, obviously, all of his doubts, Abraham finally decides he will do it, takes the knife, but just at that point, God intervenes. And it's the similar kind of logic that if you trust, it'll be okay. Or there's a famous, I think it's a Zen saying, leap and the net will appear. So you don't wait for the net to appear before you and then jump. You jump and then the net appears.
It's like that bit in Indiana Jones when he's a leap of faith.
It's a leap of faith.
So, and then there's a kind of invisible path.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so those are all similar ideas. So you've got Indiana Jones, the leap of faith, Kierkegaard, Derrida. I think there is as well as a philosophical tradition, there is a literary theological tradition here in the idea of what you might call the Pilgrim's Progress. So this is a young man, I think we can agree. He's not a child, but he's in an early stage of adulthood, probably. So at the beginning of a mature journey in life, it looks like. And that would correspond with the idea of the Pilgrim's Progress, so a spiritual journey here, which would follow a similar logic in a way to that which Kierkegaard is suggesting. Namely, you can only plan so much, and the journey is as important as the destination. And the being open to the unusual is where the greatest learning is going to arise. Now, there's an interesting dynamic in this picture between verticals, horizontals, and gradients. We've got the horizontal of the cliff. We've got the vertical of the fool and the sun, and we have the gradient then of the mountains behind. Now, I find this interesting because in this more theological tradition, we are thinking about human time as working on a horizontal, going from left to right, as in where we get the word horizon from, going from left to right, and it's not dissimilar in your version of the card there. But we have this strong vertical with the sun. Now, I said a moment ago that the sun is not a religious sun in this set of connotations. I don't think it is particularly. But the idea of the vertical cutting into the horizontal is a profoundly Christian one, in the sense that it evokes the idea, first of all, of the cross, the downward and the across, and the idea of God intervening into human time, and that will be the place at which revelation, epiphany, or forward progress can be made. Now, I don't really particularly think that these are Christian cards, except by allusion. We know they have an origin in 16th century Italy, so it's not completely lacking in some of that symbolism. And some of the other major arcana, I think, do have it a bit more strongly. But the point here being that when we step out foolishly, things can appear from out of the blue, not on the horizon, not on the horizontal of the horizon, but happening, as it were, from above, that we might not have foreseen before, coming from the sun in this case, or some other form of divine, quasi-divine, or indeed pagan intervention. I think, generally speaking, this is more of a religious or even a pagan landscape than it is a religious one. But nevertheless, there's something in the colouring which I think also is half a bridge towards religious iconography as well.
Yeah, the gold, the kind of saintly gold.
Yeah, I mean, the colours will vary, I think, according to cards. So the card you were just showing up, that yellow there is a much more lemony yellow. This is a richer, egg yolky yellow. And of course,
Marseille yellow.
Well, yeah, to me that's like a Provençal yellow, a saffron yellow almost. And to me that's an interesting association because the fool slightly connotes, I think, the troubadour in southern French Occitan poetry, which is sort of contemporary with the development of the tarot. And he has a slightly poetic or romantic air to him. He's got this insouciant style, like he's gliding through life without a care in the world. And poetic as that is, and idealized as that is, I think there is nevertheless a warning in this as well, because he's not looking, he is a fool, there is a cliff edge.
Yeah.
So I think as much as the card is saying, embrace the unknown, I think it's also a warning. I think it's also saying, look out for danger too.
Yeah.
And the dog there, dog is clearly a symbol of fidelity. Presumably the dog is also warning him. I don't think the dog is just leaping up in joy, perhaps it is. But either way, it's possible that this card can be read almost exactly the opposite, in exactly the opposite way. Not embrace chance, embrace the leap of faith, but actually be very careful because you're about to walk off the edge of a cliff, and that would be very foolish. And I think with a lot of the tarot, we have both a leading and a hidden, or a major and a minor interpretation, if you like, which is partly why they're so rich in terms of the interpretative possibilities they afford. And to me, I suppose that suggests another important aspect, particularly of the Fool, but pertains a little bit to other aspects of the tarot, which relates to what in phenomenology is known as hermeneutics, the study of interpretation, really. Because this is a card, like many of them, which lends itself to multiple interpretation. It's, semantically rich. And the zero, again, is something which, rather than limiting interpretation, seems to permit it.
Yeah.
It's an open signifier.
And also, you can see that there's so many different interpretations of the Fool. Like, just one card can be so different.
Yeah, so I think the very plurality of interpretation, I think, is important for us to bear in mind, because it's saying that when it comes to symbols, when it comes to zeros, when it comes to the Fool, there is a potential non-limited quality to it. And in that sense, I think this card is putting the onus back on us, the reader of the card, sort of saying, well, you can interpret this how you want. You've got to take some responsibility for that too. It's, as much as these are cards of divination, allegedly, they're also merely prompts for us to think about actions that we will take. And this is a card of action, and it's at a point where action is about to be taken, which points us towards questions of the consequences of our action. And I suppose, you know, if there is another philosophical religious element to point out, it is the notion of karma, that all our actions do have consequences, that we can't act without consequences, that this journey that's got him so far is about to meet a very sticky end, unless he agrees to it or in some way checks his forward momentum and stops it.
But another person could come along and say, well, actually, I see that as bravery. A brave person stepping out into the unknown. I don't know, I'm just trying to think that people come to these things so differently.
People do come to these things differently. I mean, what stops that, in my view, from being bravery is that his eyes are closed. If he was looking at the risk he was facing and still continuing, for me, that would be more suggestive of bravery. It looks like he's got his eyes closed to me, and he's in a slightly dreamy state. The flower as well suggests his unconscious is active, and therefore I suggest it's less to do with bravery than a openness to being swept up into a world of the unknown, and that's what's important for him. So there's a kind of the unconscious that he's projecting into the world, but there's also the unconscious of the world which he doesn't know, which may express a fate for him. Fate, I suppose, being the other kind of key element of this card. You know, where is fate going to take me? What is fate's point here? He's equipped for, with his knapsack, he's equipped for what looks like a fairly ordinary journey across the countryside, a picnic. But actually, he might find that that needs to be something which resources him as he ends up in a spaceship orbiting the Earth.
If you could pick any character in literature or mythology, legend, or a real person to represent the fool, who would it be?
Well, in literature, the fool would be the fool in Shakespeare. So we have clowns and we have fools. If we think of the fool, probably the most famous fool in Shakespeare is the fool in King Lear. And the interesting thing about that fool is that that fool is wise. He provides counsel to the king. He's capable of speaking truth to power. He is a presence in the back of Lear's mind on the heath, and there's something slightly heath-like, or at least open and exposed about the cliff that the fool finds himself on. And the fool is both part of the court and not part of the court. Now, in the tarot, we have court cards as well. We have kings, queens, and pages. So these are courtly figures. The fool both belongs and doesn't belong to those courtly figures. But in that regard, he does, I think, belong in that literary tradition of the fool, the Shakespearean fool, and others. But in all cases, that creature who's taken into the court for amusement, yes, as a jester, but also for the ability to speak wisdoms, nostrums that the king, because of the vanity of power, or the queen because of the vanity of power, might ordinarily not have revealed to them.
Yeah, they can get away with a lot more.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then do like, subscribe and comment and share. We will continue if people enjoy it. So thank you. Bye.